Picture a blistering 1885 dusk in Miller's Pass, where Ethan Cole, a weathered rancher haunted by a choice he can't undo, kneels in the dust beside a dying stranger. Her words cut sharper than the rattlesnake's bite. Don't just stare. Save me. She's Lucía, a fugitive guide whose secrets could burn the frontier to ash. One map, one betrayal, and a band of mercenaries closing in. They're bound by survival, not trust. Will the desert bury their sins, or forge a bond stronger than blood? This tale's ending has left millions breathless. Stay for the truth revealed under a moonlit showdown. Hit subscribe, share your city in the comments, and uncover why Ethan's final choice will haunt you. The sun bled red over Miller's Pass, painting the cracked earth like rusted iron. Ethan Cole, shoulders bowed from years of hauling water and regret, yanked the last bucket from the well's dry throat. His hands, calloused as the land itself, gripped the rope, steady despite the ache in his knuckles. At 40, he was a man carved by loss, a wife taken by fever, a son by a river's greed. The rancho, a weathered husk of wood and nail, stood alone on the old cattle trail, its silence louder than the coyotes that prowled at night. Ethan liked it that way. Questions got you killed out here. A faint scrape broke the stillness, like a blade dragged through sand. Ethan froze, eyes narrowing toward the sagebrush and cactus clawing the horizon. Something moved. Low, slow. Not animal. His hand slid to the knife at his belt, the blade's weight a cold comfort. He stepped forward, boots crunching gravel, and saw her. A woman, half crawling, her body a map of dirt and blood. Her dress hung in tatters, one shoulder bare, the other stained dark. Her legs dragged, knees scraped raw, but her eyes, sharp, unyielding, locked onto his like a hawk's. "Don't just stare, ganadero," she rasped, voice thick with pain in Spanish. "Something bit me. Suck the venom before it spreads." She collapsed, one hand clutching her thigh, where blood oozed black under the fading light. Ethan's breath caught. He'd seen death's work before, rattlesnake bites that turned flesh to rot in hours. Kneeling, he pried her hand away. 2 puncture wounds, deep and angry, sat high on her inner thigh, inches from the artery. The skin was already swelling, hot to the touch. His mind flashed to a wagon train, years back. Screams echoing as he rode past, too scared to stop. A woman's plea had haunted him since. Not this time. "Hold still," he muttered, voice rough as the land. He drew his knife, cutting the fabric clean to expose the wound. She flinched, but didn't fight. Ethan tied his bandana tight above the bite, the knot biting into her skin. Her pulse thrummed under his fingers, fast but alive. He leaned in, the smell of blood and dust filling his nose, and sucked hard. The venom's tang burned his tongue. He spat, red and bitter, into the dirt. Then again, until her trembling eased. She was light when he lifted her, too light for someone who'd clawed her way through hell. Her head lolled against his chest, fever already burning through her. The rancho's door creaked as he kicked it open, the single room lit by a dying lamp. A cot in the corner, a stove, a table scarred by years of use, his world small and ordered. He laid her down, careful not to jar the wound. Her breathing was shallow but steady. Ethan stoked the stove, the iron groaning as flames licked the wood. He crushed dried poppy root from a tin, mixing it into boiling water until it dissolved into a murky brew. Propping her head, he tipped the cup to her cracked lips. She coughed, sputtered, but swallowed. Her eyes flickered open, dark and searching, then closed again. He didn't know her name, didn't need to. She was here, and that was enough. The night stretched long, the wind rattling the walls like a warning. Ethan sat by the cot, rifle across his knees, watching her chest rise and fall. Dawn was hours off when she stirred, voice barely a whisper. "Lucía," she said, unprompted. "They killed everyone." For a map, her words were fever-slurred, but they carried weight. Ethan's jaw tightened. A map meant trouble. Gold, silver, or blood. He'd seen men gutted for less. "Rest," he said. Not soft. Not cruel. He stood, checking the door's bolt. Outside, the well's shadow stretched long, but something else caught his eye. Fresh wagon tracks, deep and uneven, cutting through the dust near the gate. His grip on the rifle tightened. Lucía's hunters weren't far, and they weren't the kind to ask questions. Ethan glanced back at her face pale but fierce even in sleep. He'd made a choice tonight, one he couldn't unmake. The desert didn't care about redemption, but it always demanded a price. Dawn clawed its way over Miller's Pass, spilling gray light through the rancho's warped shutters. Ethan Cole stood at the door, the wagon tracks outside etched deep in his mind like a brand. Lucía's fever had broken, her breathing steadier, but her whispered words, map, murder, hung heavy in the air. Trouble was coming, and the desert never lied about its debts. Inside, Lucía stirred on the cot, her eyes cracking open, sharp despite the pain. She propped herself up, wincing as her bandaged thigh protested. "You didn't ask my story," she said, voice dry as the cracked earth. "Most men would." Ethan turned, rifle still in hand. "Most men talk too much." He set a tin cup of water on the table, the metal clinking against wood. "Drink, then move if you can." She did, slow but deliberate, swinging her legs off the cot. Her bare feet hit the floor, dust rising in faint clouds. She was young, maybe 25, but her movements carried the weight of someone who'd outrun death more than once. Bruises circled her wrists, fresh and ugly, telling a story she hadn't shared. Ethan didn't press. He'd learned long ago that secrets spilled when they were ready, or they killed you for asking. Lucía limped to the table, drank and scanned the room. Stove, rifle rack, a single chair. "This place yours alone?" she asked, not looking at him. "Was," Ethan said, stepping outside to check the yard. The tracks led west, toward the Keja, a jagged scar of rock where men vanished and coyotes grew fat. He didn't like it. Too close, too bold. By noon, Lucía was on her feet, ignoring the tremor in her leg. She found a hammer in the shed and started nailing a loose board on the stable door, each strike precise despite her grimace. Ethan watched from the corral, where he was brushing down his gray mare, its ear half torn from an old fight. "You'll tear that wound open," he called. "Then I'll bleed," she shot back, not pausing. The hammer's rhythm didn't falter. Ethan let her be. "Stubborn kept you alive out here." The mare snorted, sensing the tension in the air. Ethan's eyes drifted to the horizon, where dust hung low, too still for wind. Someone was watching. He'd bet his last bullet on it. Lucía noticed, too, her hammer slowing as she followed his gaze. "They're not done with me," she said, low enough that the words seemed to sink into the dirt. "Who's they?" Ethan asked finally. Not a demand, just a door left open. She wiped sweat from her brow, the hammer dangling in her hand. "Mercenaries, hired to kill a survey crew for a silver vein map. I was their guide. Got away when they turned on each other." Her jaw tightened. "They want the map. And my head." Ethan nodded, unsurprised. Greed was the desert's oldest song. "Where's the map now?" "Hidden," she said, eyes flicking to her torn satchel by the cot. "Not safe to carry." He didn't push. Instead, he handed her a curry comb. "Finish the mare. I'll check the gate." She took it, her fingers brushing his, steady despite the heat. By dusk, Lucía had tamed the mare, its coat gleaming under the fading sun. She moved more slowly now, pain carving lines into her face, but she didn't complain. Ethan returned from the gate, his boots kicking up red dust. "Found this," he said, tossing a leather bracelet onto the table. It was braided, stained with blood. Not hers. Lucia's breath hitched. "Belonged to Javier, the crew's leader." Her voice was steel, but her hands shook. "They're here." Ethan's gut twisted. The bracelet wasn't dropped by accident. It was a taunt. He grabbed his rifle, checking the chamber. "Stay inside tonight." She didn't argue, but her eyes burned with something fiercer than fear. "I don't hide." "Then don't die," he said, stepping into the dark. That night, Ethan rigged a tripwire at the corral, thin enough to miss in the moonlight. Lucía sat by the window, sharpening a knife she'd found in the shed, the blade's edge catching the lamplight. Neither slept. Near midnight, a soft snap echoed from the yard. Ethan was up in an instant, rifle raised, peering through the shutter's crack. A shadow moved near the stable, too tall for a coyote, too quiet for a drunk. Lucía gripped her knife, ready. The shadow froze, then retreated, swallowed by the Cajaw's black maw. Ethan lowered his gun, heart pounding. "They're testing us," he said. "Won't be long now." Lucía nodded, her blade still gleaming. "Let them come." The rancho's walls creaked under the wind, but the silence between them was heavier, forged in the certainty that blood would spill before dawn. The desert held its breath, the wind dying to a low hiss as Ethan and Lucía stood in the rancho's shadowed yard, the echo of the tripwire snap still ringing in their ears. The shadow had vanished into the Caja, but its weight lingered, a promise of worse to come. Ethan's knuckles whitened around his rifle, the barrel cold against his palm. Lucía's knife gleamed, her eyes scanning the dark like a cornered wolf's. They'd been marked, and the night knew it. Morning broke harshly over Miller's Pass, the sun a merciless eye glaring down on the rancho. Ethan crouched by the corral, tracing the shadow's boot prints, shallow, deliberate, circling the gate. "He didn't come alone," he muttered, squinting toward the rocky scar of the Caja. Lucía, leaning against the stable, rewrapped her thigh's bandage, the wound scabbing but still raw. "They never do," she said, her voice steady despite the sweat beading her brow. She'd swapped her torn dress for one of Ethan's old shirts, sleeves rolled to her elbows, the fabric loose but practical. They worked in silence, fortifying the rancho. Ethan hammered new bolts into the door, each strike a defiance against the coming storm. Lucía dragged a crate of nails from the shed, her limp fading with every step. She didn't ask for help, and he didn't offer. Instead, he showed her where he'd stashed the map, sewn into the lining of her satchel, hidden under a false bottom. "If they come, they won't find it easy," he said. Her nod was grim, but her fingers lingered on the satchel, as if anchoring herself to its purpose. By noon, Lucía spoke, her words cutting through the heat. "The map wasn't just for silver. My crew was charting native land, keeping it from settlers' hands." She paused, eyes distant. "They died for that." Ethan stopped hammering, his chest tightening. He'd seen land wars, families butchered, deeds burned. "And you?" he asked, not looking at her. "I carry their fight," she said. Simple, final. Ethan met her gaze, seeing not just a survivor, but a woman forged in fire. He wanted to tell her about the wagon train, the screams he'd ignored, the guilt that gnawed his bones. Instead, he said, "You're not alone now." It wasn't a vow, just truth. The air grew heavier as dusk bled red across the horizon. Ethan rigged snares along the corral's edge, wire loops buried in dust, sharp enough to cripple a horse. Lucía carved stakes from mesquite branches, planting them near the well to slow any rush. Their hands moved with purpose, but the desert's silence mocked them, thick with unseen eyes. Ethan caught himself glancing at Lucía, her focus unbroken, and felt a pang. Not pity, but respect. Stories like hers deserve to be heard, and if this tale of grit and survival moves you, hit subscribe to join us in the dust. Share your town in the comments. Let's keep these frontier truths alive. Night fell, and trouble arrived soft-footed. A stone marker by the gate, upright that morning, lay toppled, its base smeared with ash. Lucía's breath caught. "They're saying they see us," she whispered. Ethan's jaw clenched. He'd played this game before. Taunts to break your nerve. "Let 'em talk," he growled, but his pulse hammered. Hours later, hooves thudded beyond the Kija. 3 riders appeared, their silhouettes jagged against the moon. They didn't hide, reining up just outside rifle range. "We're just passing, friend," the leader called, voice oily, his leather vest glinting with a braided bracelet. Javier's. Lucía's hand tightened on her knife, but Ethan's look held her still. "No room here," he shouted back. "Move on!" The leader laughed, low and mean. "Give us the girl and her map, or this rancho burns." His men shifted, rifles glinting. Ethan's finger grazed his trigger, but he knew the math. 2 against 3, with Lucía half-healed and ammo low. The riders didn't advance, just sat there, letting fear do the work. "You've got till dawn," the leader said, wheeling his horse. They melted into the dark, leaving dust and dread. Inside, Lucía paced, her knife slashing the air. "I should burn the map. End this!" Her voice cracked, not with fear, but fury. Ethan grabbed her wrist, gentle but firm. "Your crew died for it. Don't let 'em win." She pulled free, eyes blazing, but nodded. They were trapped. The rancho a cage under the desert's unblinking stars. Ethan reloaded his rifle, the click loud in the silence. "We'll fight," he said. Lucía's stare was iron. "We'll bleed." The night stretched taut, every creak a threat, every shadow a blade. The rancho's walls seemed to pulse with the weight of Lucía's words. "We'll bleed." As Ethan loaded his last cartridges, the metallic click swallowed by the desert's vast silence. Dawn was hours away, and the mercenaries' threat hung like smoke over Miller's Pass. The Kija loomed beyond the gate, its jagged teeth ready to chew up any plan. Ethan's eyes met Lucía's, her knife still clenched, her face a mask of resolve. They weren't running. Not tonight. Starlight carved sharp shadows across the yard as Ethan outlined their stand. "We draw 'em into the Kija," he said, voice low, tracing a rough map in the dirt with his knife. "Narrow walls. No room to flank. We use the dark." Lucía nodded, her fingers testing the weight of a hatchet she'd sharpened earlier. "I'll lead 'em in," she said. "They want me. They'll follow." Ethan's jaw tightened. He didn't like it, but she was right. Her presence was the bait, and the desert was their blade. They moved fast. Ethan doused the rancho's lamp, letting moonlight guide them. Lucía rigged a smoldering pile of sagebrush near the gate, the smoke curling thick to mimic a fire. "They'll think we're burning the map," she whispered, her breath warm against the chill. Ethan hauled a ladder to the rancho's roof, his vantage point for the ambush. He handed Lucía a whistle carved from bone. "2 blasts when you're in position," he said. She tucked it under her shirt, her eyes unreadable. The plan was simple but brutal. Lucía would lure the mercenaries into the Kija, where Ethan would pick them off from above. The snares and stakes they'd set earlier would slow any rush. But plans in the desert were like promises, fragile, easily broken. Ethan climbed to the roof, the shingles creaking under his boots, and settled behind a chimney stack, rifle steady. Below, Lucía slipped into the yard, her silhouette darting toward the gate, hatchet in hand. 2 sharp whistles pierced the night. Ethan's pulse steadied. She was in the keja. He sighted down the barrel, the moonlight glinting off the rocks. Minutes dragged like hours until hooves thundered, 3 riders charging the gate, their silhouettes hulking against the dust. The leader, his braided bracelet catching the light, bellowed, "She's burning it! Get her!" The smoke had worked. They dismounted, rifles drawn, and plunged into the keja's mouth, blind to the trap. Ethan waited, breath held, until the first mercenary tripped a snare. His leg caught in wire. A scream split the air as he fell, his horse bolting. Ethan fired, the shot cracking like thunder, and the second man dropped, clutching his chest. But the leader was fast, ducking behind a boulder, his rifle barking back. A bullet grazed the chimney, showering Ethan with splinters. He cursed, reloading, his shoulder stinging from the recoil. Below, Lucía moved like a wraith, hatchet flashing as she slashed the third man's arm, forcing him to drop his gun. He lunged, tackling her into the dirt, and Ethan's heart lurched. He aimed, but they were too close, a writhing knot of shadow. Then a wet crunch. Lucía drove the hatchet into his shoulder, rolling free as he howled. She scrambled behind a rock, gasping, blood streaking her arm. The leader roared, firing wildly into the keja. A shot clipped Ethan's shoulder, fire searing through muscle. He grunted, grip slipping, but held the rifle steady. Lucía shouted, "Stay down!" and hurled a rock, drawing the leader's fire. Ethan seized the moment, sighting the man's chest. His shot was true, but before the leader fell, a second figure, hidden until now, emerged from the dark, pistol blazing. The bullet missed Lucía by inches, and Ethan's stomach dropped. They'd missed a 4th man. Chaos erupted. The leader, wounded but alive, turned on his own, screaming, "You traitor!" His pistol flashed, and the 4th man crumpled, blood pooling in the dust. Lucía lunged, tackling the leader, her hatchet raised. They rolled, a brutal dance, until she pinned him, blade at his throat. "For Javier," she hissed, and drove it home. The keja went silent, save for the wind's low moan. Ethan slid down the ladder, pain lancing his shoulder. Lucía stood over the bodies, chest heaving, the map still hidden, safe in her satchel. She tore a strip from her shirt, binding Ethan's wound with steady hands. "We're not done," she said, voice hard. The surviving mercenary had fled, but the map's secret was out. Dawn would bring answers, or more blood. They limped back to the rancho, the desert watching, its justice as cold as the moonlight. The keja's silence clung to Ethan and Lucía as they staggered back to the rancho, blood and dust caking their skin. Dawn's first light crept over Miller's Pass, cold and unforgiving, illuminating the map still safe in Lucía's satchel. A fragile victory, won at the cost of scars. Ethan's shoulder throbbed, the makeshift bandage soaked red, but Lucía's steady hand on his arm kept him moving. The desert had spared them, but its mercy was thin, and the fleeing mercenary's shadow lingered like a curse. The rancho stood battered but unbroken, its gate creaking under the morning wind. Lucía sank onto the porch, her hatchet dropped beside her, its blade dulled by blood. Ethan eased down next to her, rifle across his knees, scanning the horizon for dust trails. None came. The air smelled of sage and iron, the quiet heavy with what they'd survived. Lucía pulled the map from her satchel, its edges frayed but intact, the inked lines tracing a vein of silver and a fight for native land. "This gets to the judge in Carson's Bluff," she said, voice raw. "For them." Ethan nodded, his throat tight. He'd seen justice in the desert before, swift, messy, rarely fair. But her crew's deaths deserved more than a grave of sand. "You'll need a horse," he said, glancing at the gray mare, her coat gleaming despite the night's chaos. Lucia's eyes followed, softening for the first time. "She's ready," she said, almost to herself. They spent the morning preparing. Ethan cleaned his rifle, the familiar weight grounding him as pain flared in his shoulder. Lucia stitched a tear in her satchel, her needle flashing in the sunlight. She spoke little, but her movements were sure, each stitch a step toward leaving. Ethan watched her, the guilt of his past, ignoring that wagon train's cries, stirring anew. He wanted to ask her to stay, to make the rancho more than a waypoint. But the desert didn't deal in wants, only choices. By noon, Lucía stood by the corral, the mare saddled, her satchel slung across her shoulder. Ethan handed her a canteen, the metal cool against his palm. "Carson's Bluff is 3 days," he said. "Stay off the main trail." She took it, her fingers brushing his, and met his gaze. "You didn't have to help," she said. "Why did you?" He looked past her, to the Kejaw's scarred rocks. "I stood by once, watched people die, never again." His voice was steady, but the words cut deep. Lucía studied him, her expression unreadable, then nodded. "You're not that man anymore," she said. Simple, final. She mounted the mare, her posture straight despite the bruises marking her arms. Ethan stepped back, his boots scuffing the dirt. "If you're ever back this way," he started, then stopped. She smiled, faint, but real. "You'll see me." The mare snorted, eager, and Lucía gave a gentle nudge. Horse and rider moved toward the horizon, dust rising in their wake, until they were a speck against the Loma's rise. Ethan stood alone, the rancho's silence louder than ever. He walked to the shed, his steps heavy, and pulled a weathered plank from the pile. His knife carved slow, deliberate letters into the wood. "Here, people help without asking." The words were uneven, but they held weight, a marker for what he'd chosen to become. He nailed the plank to the gatepost, each hammer strike a vow to the desert. Days passed, and the rancho settled into its old rhythm. Ethan mended the corral, fed the remaining horses, and pulled water from the well, his shoulders stiff but healing. The Keja stayed quiet, no hoofbeats or shadows to break the peace. At night, he sat on the porch, the plank's words catching the moonlight. He didn't know if Lucía had reached Carson's Bluff, if the map had brought justice, but he felt her absence, a hollow that wasn't regret, but something closer to pride. One morning, a rider came, not Lucía, but a boy from the bluff, barely 16, with a letter. Ethan took it, his hand steady. The judge had the map, the boy said. The land was safe, the mercenaries' crimes exposed. Lucía was gone, headed north, chasing another fight. Ethan unfolded the paper, her handwriting sharp. "Keep the gate open." L. He tucked it into his pocket, the weight light but sure. The rancho stood under a clear sky, its gate unbarred, the plank a quiet testament. Ethan returned to the well, pulling water, the rope familiar in his hands. The desert stretched wide, unforgiving, but he was no longer just surviving. He was living, one choice at a time, on a land that asked nothing but gave everything to those who stayed. This tale of Ethan and Lucía leaves us pondering. Did she find peace carrying her crew's fight, or was Ethan's choice to stay the truer redemption? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Your take on their paths means the world. Gratitude for riding through Miller's Pass with us, feeling the desert's grit and heart. We'll meet again under these wide skies, with more stories that cut deep. If Lucía's courage or Ethan's stand stirred you, share this journey and join us for the next. What would you have done at that rancho gate? Let's hear it, and keep the fire burning for more frontier truths.